Hello and welcome. Bucky O'Hare, by writer Larry Hama and the artist Michal Golden, is probably best remembered as a cartoon series or as an arcade game which had a home console version and a handheld version. However, it began as a serialized story in the anthology title Echoes of Future Past from Neal Adams' Continuity Comics between 1984 and 1985. It was then compiled as Continuity's first graphic novel, which saw print in 1986. Finally, it was published again as a comic book series in 1991. That series was intended to run 6 issues, but only 5 were ever printed, so it's incomplete. The good news is, it's not really unfinished. That series was just a reformatted version of the original serialized story, which does have an ending. First, let's get into what Bucky O'Hare is about. Now, for clarity, I'm going to summarize the graphic novel. There are minor differences between it and the serialized story, mainly at the beginning. The comic series has numerous changes, but I'll get into that later. Although the sequence of events is the same in all 3 versions. Hi, this is Alan, the voice of Strange Brain Parts. Sorry for the interruption, but I'll be brief. Please subscribe and support this channel on Patreon. Links are down below. Thank you. Now back to the video. The story is about Captain Bucky O'Hare and the intrepid crew of the starship Righteous Indignation, which may be the best ship name of all time. It's a name that immediately says, yeah, we're rebels. Want to make something of it? The opening line is also kind of classic. It's the day after yesterday in a seedy section of the universe. Then again, I might be slightly biased about opening lines involving other universes. Anyway, this universe was officially named the Aniverse for the cartoon. It's not properly named in the comic. But I'm going to call it the Aniverse for the sake of simplicity. The Righteous Indignation is under attack from the evil Toad Empire. Unfortunately, they take damage to their engines, which means engaging their warp drive to escape would have unpredictable results. Faced with the choice between uncertainty or certain death, Bucky powers up the drive and takes his chances. This creates a link between the Aniverse and our universe. Specifically, it links with the photon accelerator of the boy genius, Willie DeWitt. Willie has an interesting home life. His parents are products of the 60s, and they prefer he went outside and touch grass, rather than, attempt to improve humanity through science. They are faceless, non-authority figures, and a parody of the granola-eating protesters from a different time. Also, they have no problem leaving their child at home alone while they go off and do their own thing. Not a great look, but at least they're not forcing their child to participate in their lifestyle and beliefs. So there's that. Moving on. Bucky and the members of his crew find themselves in Willie's room. After a brief misunderstanding, Willie offers to help repair their engine. Unfortunately, the Toads are still attacking the ship. Reality begins to distort, and the first mate, Jenny, shuts the warp drive down to prevent the entire crew from being captured. This leaves Bucky stranded in Willie's dimension, as the Righteous Indignation is taken over by Toads. Luckily, the Toads ignore the robot, Blinky, who turns the warp drive on again, which allows everyone to travel to the Aniverse. Willie goes along to fix the engines. In a chilling history lesson, it's learned that the Toads were once a consumer-obsessed society that created a worldwide computer network. The network declared itself a dictator, lobotomized its creators, and took control, turning the world into an industrial regime. A more serious modern parallel about radicalization and groupthink using a worldwide network is pretty easy to make here. Afterwards, the Toad Empire decided to rule the entire galaxy, which began the war Bucky and his crew now fight. There are numerous lighthearted misadventures and complications as the team try to rescue Jenny and repair their spaceship. It's all good fun that has a sense of adventure and danger, but never gets too serious. Bucky encounters a godlike being who is highly ambivalent about the Toad Empire plundering his planet for resources. With the assistance of this being, the crew of the Righteous Indignation are assembled together once again. The Toad commander, displeased they've escaped, decides to destroy the planet and kill Bucky and his crew. However, the resources the Toads plundered to power that planet-destroying weapon are an illusion. When they position their ship to fire on the planet, the illusion disappears and their ship implodes. The heroes are saved. That's a nice subtle critique of consumer culture and how the meaningless greed it inspires is a fantasy that leads to self-destruction. It's also a very slight copy of the ending to A New Hope, which just goes to show how influential and pervasive that movie was back in the late 70s. In Willie's universe, his parents return home. They're impressed with a note he left behind that they interpret as Willie running away from home and asserting some type of independence. Unfortunately, they turn off his interdimensional device because it wastes energy. Willie is now trapped in the Aniverse. Bucky suggests Willie join their crew, and they will find a way to get him home. According to the writer, Larry Hama, who is best known for his long run on G.I. Joe, Bucky was first created around 1978. It was intended to be a series for DC. However, DC promised, then dragged its heels on a contract that would allow Hama to retain creators' rights. Hama wisely held off until continuity came around and made an offer. Originally, Hama was going to write and draw the comic. Instead, he teamed up with Michal Golden, whom he had worked with at DC. Undeniably, the star of the series is Michal Golden's artwork. He produced this after his seminal work on the Marvel series, Micronauts. While it is far more cartoony than his prior work, it is spot-on perfect for the tone of the script. It is simply charming and delightful, which reflects Hama's lighthearted writing. In concept and execution, it's hard to find any fault in it, because both work so well together. Sure, there are a few stilted bits, but that's a result of the story originally being serialized. It stops on a cliffhanger every 10 pages, and when it picks up, the transition is not always smooth. But really, that's being very nitpicky. It flows very well in the serialized story and the graphic novel. It's no surprise the characters were turned into toys. Both Hama and Golden were model building enthusiasts. In fact, the cast was specifically made so translation into toys would be easy. To paraphrase Hama's direction to Golden, the characters were designed to be held in a little kid's hands. Of course, Golden had recent experience working on the Micronauts, which was entirely based on, well, Star Wars and an existing line of toys. So Golden had a great understanding of adapting toys into a comic and reversing the process so everything appealed to a young, toy-collecting audience. This brings us to the incomplete series. In what will become a recurring theme, Golden and Hama were not involved with the 1991 comic. In fact, for additional panels and the covers, an uncredited artist working for continuity aped Golden's style. Furthermore, some panels were repeated and others enlarged to fill out space on the page. To put it bluntly, it's kind of a hack job, where 10 pages of material are expanded into 20-plus pages to justify it being published as a series. Looking at the original art and then comparing it to the series kind of hurts the eyes. It might be fine if one was unfamiliar with the originals. Otherwise, yeah, it's hard not to see it as a pretty bad copy and paste effort. Which is kind of shocking, because Continuity was a studio familiar with doing professional paste-ups for logos and other advertising art. But that Bucky O'Hare reprint is definitely not that. I'd speculate and say it was hastily produced to capitalize on the toys and cartoon. Although, the word hastily is a bit out of place. There were significant publishing gaps between issues, even though it was simply a reformatted reprint. I mean, it took 14 months just to produce 5 issues. It takes a certain level of disorganization to have those kinds of delays for a reprint. Worse yet, there is no ending, so that series is a mess. Apparently, there was a UK series that reprinted the original material and then continued on without the input of either Hama or Golden. Let me rephrase for clarity. There was a UK series, that's not in question. But it's not something I could personally track down, so I'm unable to confirm its contents. All I can say with some confidence is it was likely a licensing deal between Continuity and the UK publisher, which allowed them to produce new material. Although apparently, at least some new work was produced by a Continuity artist and writer. How much? I don't know. Information is extremely scarce about that series. Also in the realm of something I couldn't track down is the manga edition published in 2017. It's a black and white version of the story with additional material from the UK series. It exists, but I've never seen it. Tragically, there was an entirely new graphic novel that was written and partially drawn. Put together, the two graphic novels made a complete screenplay for an animated feature. Hama had actually written the complete story, which resolves Willie being stranded in the Aniverse before it appeared in Echo of Future Past. However, Continuity shut down its publishing business before the second graphic novel was complete, so it partially exists, but it's never seen print. Presumably, Continuity Comics going out of business also affected any plans for the characters to appear in other media, because as mentioned, Continuity held the rights to the characters for toys, movies, etc. So those rights could have become a legal mess, and probably held as assets against Continuity's publishing debts. That's my speculation, based on the fact there was an explosion of Bucky material between 1990 and 1992, but nothing after. That said, I didn't investigate the fallout of Continuity imploding or the various licensing deals. All I can say is Continuity didn't go out of business, and decades later, they licensed Bucky for toys and the manga edition. So I'm guessing there were some legalities in 1992-ish that prevented it from being exploited further. Or maybe there was no interest in Bucky after 1992. That's possible too. In the end, what's interesting is that 48 pages of published comic book material inspired a whole other industry of Bucky O'Hare media. It's similar to the Men in Black in that respect. Both are strong concepts, not overly popular in its original medium, but they became something entirely different when it was translated into others. It's a testament to how some ideas have so much life, even though they didn't actually live very long. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and all that engagement stuff, and turn on notifications, because the algorithm is notoriously, let's call it, finicky. Naturally, I'd like to take a moment and thank all my fine supporters on Patreon and YouTube. Times are a little tough at the moment, so I really appreciate that ongoing support. It does make a difference, so thank you. Extra special thanks to Chapel Pluto, John Woolham, Plutocracy, Spencer Estes, Green Man, Constant Disappointment Records, Jeff Nicholson, Sickin, Francis De La Cruz, Russell Bull, John Nyukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Ruby St. Dennis, Phil Sagan, Edward Clayton Andrew, Corey Drew, Brian Deaton, Tom Granis, John Gaunt, James Graham, and Matt Marino. You were all justified and ancient. Until next time.